The gym was never meant to hold this kind of silence. Its walls still smelled of varnished wood and bleach, the faint sourness of wrestling mats stacked behind a curtain. Fluorescent lights buzzed with their usual disinterest, and somewhere near the back a fan hiccuped, as if even the machinery was uneasy. Folding chairs screeched when people shifted. There were raffle baskets on a long table, half-empty coffee urns, paper cups gone soggy at the rims. It was community night, nothing grand, just a local gathering with too many voices, too much small laughter trying to make a tired room feel alive. And then the girl spoke. She was small enough that the microphone dwarfed her. She had to tilt her chin to reach it, sleeves of an oversized sweatshirt nearly swallowing her hands. Her voice was steady, not childish in tone, not meant as a performance. She simply said, her mom was Ronda Rousey. For 1 second, nothing. Then the first laugh, nervous, almost gentle. Then another, sharper. Within moments the sound rolled across the chairs like dropped marbles, quick and unstoppable. People laughed the way adults laugh when they think they're helping a child wake up from a fantasy. It wasn't cruel in intent, not at first, but cruelty rarely introduces itself honestly. A man in a baseball cap leaned back, grinning too wide. "Right, and my cousin's the governor," he said, pitching his voice for maximum reach. The people around him answered with a fresh round of chuckles. At the refreshment table another voice added, "Save the tall tales for bedtime, kid." He said it with false warmth, like he was the kind one. The crowd rewarded him with more laughter, but the girl didn't smile, didn't flinch, didn't drop the mic. That was the moment the room began to shift. Her silence wasn't fear, it was something harder. She simply stared at them, expression unreadable, letting the sound of their own amusement echo too long. There's a kind of stillness children can hold that adults have forgotten. Rigid, unyielding, unashamed of discomfort. It unnerved them more than tears would have. The PTA president tried to step in, voice sugary with forced calm. "Let's be respectful now. Let's remember why we're here tonight." But her words floated like balloons. No one reached for them. The laughter had momentum. "Hey, if that's true," a teenager shouted from the back, "where is she?" He stretched the word "she" until it lost weight. A smattering of nervous giggles followed. The girl didn't answer. She only let the microphone hum faintly, as if even the static was more dignified than the noise surrounding her. Her sleeves slipped just enough to reveal a faint matte burn along her forearm, the kind only insiders would notice. No one pointed it out. They weren't looking that closely. Another man, older, heavy boots dusted with paint, decided he'd be the one to restore reality. "Come on, kid," he said, pointing at the ground. "That's not a name you throw around. Everybody wishes they were somebody." His grin was wide, but you could already sense the effort behind it. And still the girl stood, eyes fixed, voice finally breaking the silence. "I'm not lying." Not loud, not dramatic. Just a simple declaration, stripped of apology. It landed sharper than the laughter had. Some shifted uncomfortably. A boy lowered his phone. The woman who had laughed the hardest earlier stammered, "We were only joking," her tone collapsing under its own weight. The man in the boots barked another laugh, but it sounded brittle this time. "Sweetheart, you don't even know what lying is yet." He wanted the room back, but the crowd's energy was thinning, uneasy now under the girl's stillness. The space seemed to tilt. Some people buried faces in phones, others whispered. A few glanced at the exit, as if escape might erase the sound of what they'd just done. And then the side door opened. It wasn't grand. No entrance music, no spotlight. Just the weary squeal of metal hinges, letting in a rush of cool night air that smelled faintly of asphalt and exhaust. A figure stepped through, jacket plain, hair tied back in haste, hands empty. She didn't hurry, didn't scan for cameras, didn't smile. She moved the way people move when they belong somewhere, whether others like it or not. Some recognized her instantly, stomachs tightening before their minds allowed it. A boy whispered, "No way." A clipboard slipped down from nervous hands. The man in the boots froze, his grin petrified, unable to retreat without admitting why. The girl set the mic gently back on its stand. She didn't call out, didn't wave. She just turned to watch her mother approach, hands folded together as if she'd known this was inevitable. The room tried to recalibrate. Laughter couldn't survive here anymore, but no one was ready to replace it with applause. They sat in a half-collapse of guilt and disbelief. Fluorescent tubes buzzed louder. The gym clock ticked like a metronome for judgment. Rhonda walked the aisle without demanding space, and yet people shifted away all the same. She reached the front, stood beside her daughter, hands loose at her sides. She let the silence stretch until even the air felt heavy. Then she spoke, calm and precise. "You're laughing at a child because she told you the truth?" The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. They anchored themselves in every corner of the gym, pressed against every chest, and waited. No one laughed again. Just wondering. "Where are you watching from?" "Write it down, Bello." No one spoke at first. The silence was thick, sticky, clinging to every corner of the gym. It wasn't the respectful quiet of a church or the hushed focus before a game. It was the guilty kind, the kind that follows when people realize they've shown too much of themselves and can't stuff the moment back inside. The buzzing of the fluorescent lights filled the vacuum. Chairs creaked. A paper cup collapsed in someone's fist with a flat crack. Rhonda didn't chase their attention. She held it by refusing to do anything. She stood beside her daughter, shoulders loose, hands steady, breathing in time with the hum of the room. There was no shield, no separation. She didn't step in front of the girl as a protector. She stood level with her, making it clear that the child's truth needed no defense. That decision unnerved the crowd more than a shouted speech ever could. The girl's hand slipped into hers, fingers curling instinctively around rougher knuckles. That tiny act detonated louder than the laughter had. Some people winced. Others suddenly discovered imaginary dirt on their shoes. One woman, her laugh still echoing in memory, pressed her palm to her chest as if to check whether her heart was still in place. Then came the excuses. They always come. "We were joking," blurted the woman in the red cardigan, her voice tight and shrill. She tried to tack on a laugh, but it came out bent, like a hinge refusing to close. Nobody meant anything. The man in the baseball cap leaned forward in his chair, elbows spread wide to take up space. "Look, this is a small town. Folks here work hard. Sometimes a big claim rubs people wrong, that's all." He paused, waiting for nods that never arrived. Nothing personal. But it was personal, and the silence told him so. Rhonda's eyes swept across them, not sharp, not soft, but steady, like a teacher waiting for a class to sit still. "You laughed at a child," she said, each word paced like a step, "because she told you the truth." The statement didn't need emphasis. It landed with the kind of blunt force that doesn't ask permission. Some tried to breathe it away with sighs. Others straightened their backs, as if posture could insulate them from shame. A man in paint-spattered boots decided to push back. "Nobody here hates her," he said, pointing a finger as though proof came with the gesture. "We've just got the right to be skeptical, that's all. You can't expect people to swallow every story." The girl looked at him. Her voice, thin but unbroken, slid into the space he left. "I'm not lying." That was it. Just 3 words. They landed like glass dropped on tile. The gym shivered. The man blinked hard, looking for a smirk to save him, but none came. Behind him, whispers bloomed. Some faces tightened, embarrassed at their own part in the laughter. Others dug in, unwilling to surrender the comfort of doubt. The crowd split without moving an inch. A teenager tried to lighten it. "Seriously, How do we know it's really her? His words were casual, but his eyes flicked nervously toward Rhonda as soon as they left his mouth. She turned her head, slowly, deliberately. That was enough. His sentence withered halfway, and he sank into his chair as if gravity had doubled. The red cardigan woman spoke again, more desperate now. No one wanted to hurt her. She reached out with her hands, palms open, like someone offering proof of innocence. Kids exaggerate, you know? That's just how they are. Rhonda faced her. She didn't exaggerate. She told you who she is. Her tone didn't rise, but it sliced cleaner than any shout. The woman dropped her eyes to her lap. Then came the pivot everyone tries in moments like these, the search for an escape hatch. The man in boots spread his arms wide. "Why even come here?" he challenged. "You're famous, right? This is just a school gym. Why bother with us?" Rhonda didn't move. "Because she asked me to," she said, nodding at her daughter. "Because she wanted me to meet her town." She let the word meet hang in the air long enough to change its shape, to mean answer to. Because sometimes the hardest rooms aren't the biggest ones. Her words cracked something open. You could feel it in the way people shifted, in the way silence now carried weight instead of emptiness. The PTA president clutched her clipboard, trying to restart the program. "Maybe we should move along, get to the fire department raffle." Her voice died halfway. No one wanted a raffle. They wanted resolution, or punishment, or forgiveness. Anything but the raw edge they were standing on. A little girl in the second row stood suddenly, her head barely clearing the seat in front. "Is she really your mom?" she asked, not to Rhonda, but to the child still gripping her hand. "Yes," the girl said simply. No smile, no victory, just truth. And that truth lingered. People felt it working under their skin. Some shifted uneasily, others stared straight ahead. A few tried for nervous coughs or whispered jokes, but none of it could lift the weight. Rhonda let the silence stretch again, then gave it one last cut. "You can start over," she said evenly, "or keep pretending." She didn't say which choice was better. She left the words hanging in the stale gym air, daring the crowd to decide what kind of people they wanted to be when the lights dimmed and they went home. And with that, she loosened her hand just enough for her daughter to step forward, toward the microphone if she wanted. The girl lifted her chin, eyes steady, and the whole room leaned in, suspended between apology and defiance, waiting to see what would come next. The gym had stopped feeling like a gym. The smell of old varnish, the faint dust baked into the rafters, the squeak of sneakers, all of it had been swallowed by the tension pressing down on the folding chairs. People were no longer just an audience, they were witnesses trapped in a story they hadn't planned to be part of. It was a man in paint-splattered boots who broke the standoff. He rose halfway through the rows, his movements heavy, as though he owned the floorboards. Mid-40s, broad shoulders gone a little soft, eyes that wanted to be sharp. He carried himself like someone used to winning arguments in hardware stores and break rooms. "All right," he said, loud enough for the sound to bounce. "Enough of this. Are we seriously supposed to swallow every word a kid blurts out, just because her mom walked in late and looks the part?" Relief washed through the crowd. The guilty relief of someone saying the thing others had thought but hadn't dared. A ripple of nods. Someone coughed into their hand, disguising agreement. The woman in the red cardigan leaned forward, grateful for a spokesman. Rhonda didn't flinch. She turned her head slowly until her eyes landed on him, and by doing so turned the whole room as well. "What's your name?" she asked, calm, neutral. He squared his shoulders. "Dan?" "Dan?" she repeated, almost softly, as if testing whether the syllable was worth its weight. "You think she lied?" "I think kids make things up," he said, shrugging with a lazy bravado. "I think people around here work hard and don't need stories shoved down their throats. Fame doesn't give you a free pass." The words clattered in the silence, but cadence alone carried them. A couple of teenagers smirked. Phones lifted higher, screens glowing. Rhonda's gaze didn't waver. Then you don't believe me either. He smiled, glad to have the floor. I don't take anything on faith. And then her daughter spoke. Her voice was thin but clear, directed at the microphone as though it could anchor her. I'm not lying. The effect was immediate. 3 words, no more, but they cut deeper than Rhonda's calm or Dan's swagger. A hush slammed down. Dan's eyes flicked toward the child, then away, because meeting her gaze would cost more than he had prepared to spend. He cleared his throat. Sweetheart, it's not about you, he tried. It's about the tone adults set. Rhonda stepped into the pause. Exactly, she said, not smiling, not blinking. Her agreement disarmed him, and for a moment his mouth hung open. He tried to recover, straightening his posture. So what now? You gonna prove it, or just stand there lecturing people who asked a fair question? A ripple moved through the room, applause from one corner, cut short when it didn't catch. The crowd was restless, hungry for a resolution they couldn't name. Rhonda shifted her weight, barely perceptible, but enough to remind everyone her body had been trained to answer challenges long before this gym. I don't need to prove anything, she said. Neither does she. Dan spread his arms wide, gesturing to the banners, the raffle table, the folding chairs. Then why are you here? Why make a scene in this town if not to prove something? Because she asked me to, Rhonda said, glancing down at her daughter. She wanted me to meet her world. And I won't let her think truth needs applause to be real. The line didn't land like inspiration. It landed like stone. You could feel the chairs shift, the air grow heavier. People recognized it, even if they wouldn't admit it. Dan tried one last pivot. Respect goes both ways, he said, his voice rising now. You can't just walk in here and demand it. Rhonda's answer came without hesitation. Respect starts one way. It comes back if it can. She let the silence swallow the words. You laughed first. That broke something. Heads turned toward him, no longer eager accomplices. The weight of his earlier laughter pressed back like heat. His temper flared. So what? You want me to apologize? In front of everyone? His tone mocked, but his jaw tightened. The girl looked at him again, steady this time. You could start with me. Her small voice cracked the room wider than any speech. A woman in the 3rd row drew her child close without realizing it. Someone else lowered their phone, suddenly unwilling to film. Dan's mouth worked, searching for a retort, but none arrived. His bluff was fraying. This is our place, he blurted. You can't just turn it into your arena. Rhonda took a step forward. The sound was quiet rubber soles on wood, but the air shifted like pressure in a storm. She didn't threaten. She simply stood close enough that excuses could no longer hide. This isn't about my arena, she said. It's about what you do in front of a child. The crowd leaned in, complicit whether they wanted to be or not. A teenager locked his phone. The PTA president tried to speak, but no one listened. Dan tilted his chin, forced to hold her eyes. So what? You want to take this outside? He asked. Too quick. Rhonda's mouth almost curved, not into a smile, but into something colder. You already brought it inside, she said softly. The silence that followed wasn't defensive anymore. It was raw, open, waiting. The girl's chin was still raised. Dan's shoulders had dropped, betraying the weight of his stance. And the crowd, the unwilling third character, felt itself pulled deeper into the choice. Watch him double down or watch him fold. Rhonda tipped her head, voice dropping to a steady whisper that carried. Do you really want to be the test? The words marked the floor like chalk, a boundary, a question, a promise. The gym held its breath, suspended on the edge of something irreversible. The air in the gym grew heavier, thick with the kind of silence that clings after a challenge. People shifted on folding chairs, their earlier laughter now a memory they wished they could erase. It was no longer a gathering in a community hall. It felt like a trial, and everyone was a juror. Dan stood straighter, his boots scraping against the wooden floor. He tried to sound confident, but his voice betrayed a tremor. "All right then. Prove it. You claim to be her mother. Show us. Otherwise, this is just a story you're selling." He wanted it to sound like a dare, but it rang more like a plea. Some nodded, relieved that someone had spoken. Others turned away, ashamed of how eager they were for proof. Phones lifted higher, their red lights glowing. The crowd was becoming its own camera. Rhonda didn't blink. "No," she said evenly. The single word cut sharper than anything Dan had rehearsed. He barked a laugh that fell flat. "Convenient. You walk in here, let the kids speak, and nobody's allowed to ask questions? That's not truth. That's theater." Before Rhonda answered, her daughter moved. The girl tugged open her backpack and pulled out a creased photo. She held it out with two small hands. The two of them in a locker room, sweat on their faces, towel hanging awkwardly, fluorescent lights washing the moment in unflattering honesty. A private memory that didn't need polish. The room murmured. Some leaned closer, others recoiled. "Could be fake," someone muttered. "Oh, Photoshop." The word slithered through the chairs. A teenager hissed, "Hold it higher," eager for a clearer shot on his phone. Rhonda took the photo gently, lifting it for the first rows to see. Nothing glamorous, just fatigue and closeness. Silence thickened as people noticed the small details. The scar on her knuckle, the crooked towel, the child's lopsided grin. Real things. Dan smirked, though his jaw twitched. Props. Anybody can print a picture. You people will buy anything if it makes you feel special. The phrase "you people" stung. A few turned their heads away from him. Rhonda's eyes didn't move. "Truth doesn't need proving," she said, "but sometimes people need a jolt to wake up." The words dropped like stones. Some nodded, others stiffened. A woman in a denim jacket stood suddenly, her voice trembling. "I've seen them," she said, "at the rec center, Tuesdays." She walks in, holding that same hand. I know it's real. Her confession cracked something open. Heads turned. Whispers began. Another voice added, "That scar! My son wrestles. I've seen it." "That's no fake," Dan snapped back louder. "Witnesses now? You all want to feel like heroes. This is a stunt, and you're the audience." His voice rose, but the strength drained out of it. The girl lifted her chin, stepping forward. She took the microphone with hands steadier than before. "You can laugh at me," she said clearly. "Don't laugh at her." The room erupted, not in chaos, but in motion. People stood without being told, clapping, murmuring, some shouting her name. Even those who had doubted stared at the floor, unwilling to meet Rhonda's eyes. Dan tried one last time, but his words collapsed into noise. Rhonda returned the photo to her daughter, her touch deliberate. She looked across the rows. No need for speeches. Her gaze alone pressed harder than any argument. "Truth doesn't audition," she said finally, "but if you need a wake-up, here it is." The clock ticked. A chair creaked. Phones kept filming, but the screens shook in unsteady hands. The moment held, frozen, as if the room itself waited for what would follow. The blow she promised without ever raising a hand. The silence shattered into noise. The gym was no longer a room, it had become an arena, charged with voices clashing against one another. Parents, students, neighbors, all of them argued in real time. Some shouted support for the girl, others shook their heads and muttered that they weren't convinced. It was chaos that fed on itself, a living, breathing storm of disbelief and defense. The crowd had become judge, jury, and executioner, Yet it couldn't agree on the verdict. Phones were held aloft like torches, recording every second. What had started as laughter at a child's claim now burned like a public trial. From the far side of the room, a woman rose. She had been one of the loudest voices mocking earlier, but now her expression had shifted. She stepped into the open space, her voice trembling. "I've seen them." At the rec center, Tuesday nights. She walks her in hand in hand. Her confession dropped like a stone into water, sending ripples across the gym. For a second, the atmosphere bent. Those who had defended Dan faltered, their certainty wobbling. Others seized the moment, nodding, murmuring that they too had seen hints, glimpses. A shift was happening, subtle but undeniable. Dan's face darkened. He had lived off the crowd's laughter a few minutes ago, but now it was slipping from his grip. His tone sharpened, each word spat like a nail. "This is ridiculous. You're all sheep. You believe a story because you want to. Don't you see? This is theater. She's playing you." But the anger in his voice didn't land the way he hoped. It sounded more like panic than control. His volume rose, but the higher he climbed, the more fragile it felt. Ronda hadn't moved. Her silence grew heavier, shaping the space around her. She didn't need to shout him down. His own words betrayed him. Her stillness pressed against the crowd harder than his rage. Then came the unexpected, her daughter's voice suddenly stronger, slicing through the noise. The girl stepped forward, her eyes shining not with tears, but with defiance. "You can laugh at me," she said, her tone steadier than before. "But don't laugh at her." The room froze, as if someone had cut the sound. For a heartbeat, there was nothing but that sentence hanging in the air. Then the response erupted. Applause, shouts, stamping feet. Some clapped cautiously, others with wild abandon, but the effect was the same, a tide turning. Dan spun toward the crowd, desperate to claw back control. His words spilled out, jagged and messy. "You're fools! Every last one of you. This is all a stunt." His face burned red, his hands shook, but no one rose to defend him this time. The momentum had shifted too far. Ronda finally moved, but only slightly, one step closer to her daughter, her hand resting gently on the girl's shoulder. She didn't raise her voice, but her gaze swept the room. People avoided her eyes, shame pulling their heads down. It wasn't anger in her stare, but something heavier. A mirror they didn't want to look into. The crowd's noise shifted again, now a divided roar. Some cheered her name. Others shouted back in anger, clinging to disbelief like a lifeline. The gym vibrated with it, a clash of belief and denial. For the first time, Dan looked small. The man who had sparked this confrontation with bravado now seemed cornered. His voice cracked as he tried again. "This isn't proof." Don't let her fool you, but it was no longer about him. The focus had moved to the girl. Her words had carried more weight than his shouting ever could. Even those who remained skeptical were unsettled. A child's voice had pierced through the noise in a way no adult could match. Phones kept recording, catching every twitch, every pause. Later those videos would circulate, and the moment would look even clearer. The second, when a child's defiance reshaped an entire room. Ronda still hadn't delivered the jolt she had promised. Her strength wasn't in the photo or in the argument. It was in restraint. She stood firm, radiating the calm of someone who knew the truth didn't need her defense. And that calm became unbearable for Dan. He shouted louder, veins straining in his neck, but now he looked like a man screaming into the wind. His power had evaporated. The gym had reached a dangerous balance, one spark away from explosion. On one side, disbelief, pride, and desperation. On the other, a child's courage and a mother's silence. Ronda's final look across the room sealed the moment. Cold, unwavering, it swept over the crowd like a blade. People shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her eyes. Even the loudest skeptics suddenly looked small, their voices faltering. The hall was no longer divided between belief and doubt. It was divided between those willing to face the truth and those terrified of it. And in that split second of fragile silence, everyone knew something more was coming. The noise swelled until it was nearly unbearable. Shouts collided in the air, some cheering, others furious, the whole gym trembling like it might split apart. What had started as laughter at a child's claim had turned into a battle of pride and truth. No one was neutral anymore. Everyone had chosen a side, and the room pulsed with it. Through it all, Ronda remained still. She hadn't raised her voice once, yet the weight of her presence anchored the chaos. She looked neither triumphant nor angry, just resolute, as though she had been here before, in different rings, under brighter lights, when crowds demanded proof of who she was. She stepped forward, not quickly, but with the calm precision of someone who knew every eye would follow. Her words cut through the roar without needing volume. "You doubt me?" she said. "Then test me. But remember, when you test me, you test her dignity." The crowd faltered. Some shouted encouragement, others hissed, but most held their breath. Dan, cornered by his own bravado, seized the challenge. His pride wouldn't let him retreat. He moved closer, his jaw clenched, his body stiff with the kind of anger that hides fear. Gasps rose as he stepped into the open, only a few feet from her. The gym held its breath, caught between the thrill of a spectacle and the dread of what might follow. And then, something unexpected. Before Ronda could act, her daughter moved. The girl stepped in front of her mother, arms spread, small body a shield against the man twice her size. Her voice shook, but carried farther than anyone expected. "You'll have to go through me first." The words landed heavier than any punch. Silence fell so sharply it hurt. Even the phone stopped moving. A child's defiance, pure and uncalculated, froze the room in place. Dan stopped mid-step, his face flushed, his breath ragged. For a moment, he looked less like a challenger and more like someone exposed. The crowd leaned forward, waiting for what he would do. Some shouted for him to back off. Others taunted him to continue. The air thickened, seconds stretching unbearably long. Ronda didn't move her daughter aside. She placed a steadying hand on the girl's shoulder, her expression unreadable. It was not a gesture of fear, but of trust. Trust that her child's courage was the real answer. The gym seemed suspended in that tableau. The man trembling with pride and rage, the girl standing firm, and the mother calm behind her. The crowd became restless, voices clashing again, the storm threatening to explode. And then, from the back of the hall, a sound broke through. The creak of hinges, the heavy thud of doors opening. Heads turned as footsteps echoed across the floor. Another figure entered. Tall, deliberate, face hidden in shadow until the light caught it. The noise of the crowd collapsed into murmurs. No one knew exactly who it was at first, but the presence alone shifted the room's balance. A veteran, perhaps, or a name long spoken with respect. Someone tied to the past that both Ronda and Dan were now battling over. Phones whipped around, trying to catch the moment. Whispers spread like fire. The tension doubled, not dissolved. Dan froze, caught between the challenge he had demanded and the weight of a new presence he hadn't invited. Ronda didn't look away. Her eyes followed the figure calmly, as if she had been expecting this turn all along. Her daughter held her ground, even as the attention of the entire hall shifted. The bravery in that small stance remained the most powerful image of the night. The crowd leaned forward, desperate for clarity, their imaginations rushing to fill the silence. Was this figure a witness, a challenger, an ally? No one knew, and that ignorance was unbearable. The moment stretched, hanging like a blade above the room. Every breath, every heartbeat waited for the next word, the next move. And then, the lights flickered once, the sound system popped, and the hall dropped into a single beat of darkness. When the lights snapped back, the three stood frozen at the center: Rhonda, her daughter, and Dan, while the new figure lingered at the edge, watching. The story didn't resolve. It sharpened. The crowd exploded with questions, voices colliding, phones flashing, speculation running wild. But the only thing anyone would remember, the image replayed in their minds long after, was the sight of that little girl standing in front of her mother, and the look on Dan's face when he realized courage had changed shape in front of him. What came next would remain a mystery. For now,